Cubs-Cast Corral. Yeah!
Welcome to the Cubs-Cast Corral, a 5-minute roundup of some of the best Cubs podcasts on the planet. Let's start with Bricks Behind the Ivy. Jeff had on Cubs broadcaster Cole Wright to preview the entire Cubs season, and Cole's true love of the team really did shine through on this episode and during this conversation. He thinks they're a better squad than last year, but he also sees some shortcomings, like, for example, needing maybe an extra bat and an extra arm. And the guys really like Gage Workman. Hey, so do I. On the Fly the W podcast, sayonara to Fly the W. It sounds as if they might have recorded their last show. Maybe, I don't know. I've texted Crawley to find out, but we can be sure that Crawley is not done talking about the Cubs, because he did suggest everybody go follow Crawley's clubhouse. As far as the games in Japan goes, Crawley doesn't make too much out of just 2 games, but Dustin was not a fan of how the Cubs piggybacked the pitchers, especially when it came to Boyd pitching in the exhibition game and Brown pitching in the game that actually counted. Crawley revealed his top 5 moments in Japan, with number 1 being the fans singing and chanting. That was pretty cool, definitely. Setup man Kyle questions Ben Brown's ticked down velocity, but racks it up to him simply not being ramped up yet. He doesn't think the issue is mechanical or that has anything to do with that collarbone tumor he had in his extra neck. Simply stated, he thinks these Japan games are just happening too early in the season and is not a fan. On the Recap podcast, Gordo and Cap get heated over how franchises are valued and says a strike is imminent and we could lose a full season. Guest Jesse Rogers says the floor and the ceiling has been raised on the Cubs, but Gordo isn't so sure and thinks we'll know how good the Cubs are by April 28th after they run through the gauntlet of the toughest April in baseball. On Northside territory, Sahadev and Patrick talk about how the Cubs have made real inroads in wooing Japanese players, and it all started with Yu Darvish, who we traded for a bunch of teenagers. They pointed out that 2/3 of the league aren't even engaged with Japan, but also that the reason the Cubs do it is that they get great players on the cheap, which if you look at Shota and Seiya's contracts is true. Bleacher Nation, Brett and Michael, who is expecting baby number 2 in a week, said it certainly would have been nice to have Yamamoto and Sasaki on the Cubs in these games, and asked, is there anyone in the Dodgers you wouldn't switch out for their Cubs counterpart? They commented that Suzuki looked a little in between on some of those at-bats and that Shaw looked overmatched, but fast when running the bases. Brett also said in a game of Would You Rather that he would rather take beer out of the bleachers than Ivy off the walls, because you could always drink a White Claw. On the CHGO podcast, the guys were a little frustrated watching some of the Dodgers players we dreamed on as Cubs signing possibilities beat us in Japan. But Luke and Cody are happy it was at least better than last year's opening day when we lost Justin Steele. Overall, the 2 games in Japan do not affect their full season outlook. And a new one here on the Cubs-Cast Corral, Cubs Weekly. It's Marquis' podcast, which is better than most things that Marquis actually does. And that's thanks to Tony Andracki, Elise Menaker, Andy Martinez, and Lance Brodsnowski. They made some bold predictions on this pod, including that PCA might get some MVP votes and the entire outfield could get some gold gloves. The whole outfield. They felt like the Dodgers series was disappointing considering the good vibes they had going into Japan coming from camp. But they called this a make or break year for the Cubs players and their personnel. And that, my friends, has been your Cubs-Cast Corral.